We're continuing to talk about the issue of the lulav shel asher shel ir hanidachat. We've seen a number of the building blocks. We won't complete it all tonight, but we'll see a few more components. If you look at the Gemara in Sukka on 31b, just to remind you, it's been a week for those who maybe didn't get an opportunity to review and not spend the whole shir reviewing, but the Gemara in Masechet Sukka is rather brief. It mentions about 5 lines up from the bottom, 6 lines up from the bottom, on 31b, Shal Asher Shel Ir Nidachat, quoting from the Mishne, there's 4 lines up from the bottom. Sorry, Shal Asher Apostle is Asher Apostle V'Amarava Lulav Shel Avodah Zar Lo Yitov Im Natal Kasher. We have a statement from Rava, which on the face of it sounds rather quizzical. A lulav of idolatry should not be taken, but if you did, it's kosher anyway. You remember the Gemara we saw last time, the Gemara in Chulin Daf Pei Tet, where the Gemara said, well, that's for a particular reason, which is Rava maintains mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu, they're not for your personal enjoyment, and therefore using something of avodah zarah, it's not nice, but it's not a disqualifier per se. That's what the Gemara seems to be indicating, at least based on Rashi's understanding of it. The Gemara clarifies, therefore, that when our Mishnah says that a lulav of Asherah is puzzle, the reason for that is that this lulav is an Asherah de Moshe. Asherah de Moshe from the time period mentioned explicitly in the Torah in Parshat Re'eh in Parak Yud Bet of Sefer Dvarim, quoted here by Rashi about burning all of the Asherim up that are found in Eretz Yisrael. And if we're dealing with the Asherah of Moshe, Kitute Mechtat Shiurei, so the problem with it is that it lacks the basic, from a halachic vantage point, it lacks the basic shear, the basic height that it would require, which is 4 tfachim, in order to be an actual lulav that one could shake. It has that physical structure. Halachically, it's been reduced to nothing. It's
conceptually
annihilated. Also, the fact that we see also just inferring from the Mishnah the parallel between the lulav shel Asherah and the lulav of an Ir Nidachat. Ir Nidachat, definitionally, a city slated for destruction as a result of its rampant idolatry. So everything in it is cherem, is basically considered to be, again, kitute machtat shurei, it's kisaruf dami. It wasn't burned yet, but it's as if it was already burned, even though it hasn't yet happened. Last we saw this Gemara, and we saw also 2 other Gemaras I want to remind you about. Number 1, we saw a Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah. That Gemara asks the question, what if you worship a tree and the tree is attached to the ground and it's not particularly a tree that is known to be a tree of idolatry? So does that make it off limits now to be used as a lulav? Yes or no? That was the discussion here on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph and Avodah Zarah. We won't read through the whole thing again, but this was the question of Reish Lakish. You bow down to a date palm. What can you do with the lulav? Well, there was a distinction made between a tree that was planted ab initio, the function of it was for idolatry. Asherah trees generally had that designation, versus a tree that was simply planted without designation, and then later someone bowed down to it. And then the question of, are you using it for personal use, or are you using it for the service of Hashem? And the distinction there about one way versus the other. So not learning that Gemara again. We saw, though, how all the component parts are connected. Our Gemara took a portion from right here. We saw that we had the comparison, if you will, what's written here to the idea of, is there a distinction between the tree versus the fruits? We saw some of this, and we saw that this Tosfot here, mimais olo, so it quotes here, if you quote Rava, lulav avoda kochavim, you shouldn't take, but if you take it, it's good enough, right? So we said that over there, the Gemara in Sukkah was before Bittul, and it was B'di'evet, and you'd be Yotze. Before Bittul means that the object's status was still one of idolatry. We maintain that if something is owned by a non-Jew, and the non-Jew does something to demonstrate their nullification of the idolatrous status of an object that they own, that would, so to speak, purify it and now render it usable. This, however, the Gemara had said, the Tosfot had said that over there, meaning our Gemara, Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, is in a case that's before Bittul, So it still is an object of avodah zarah, and we're talking about b'diavad. You'd still be yotze. Why? Because mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. In our case, we're talking about the case where it's already after the bittul, but we're asking, is it really lechatchila usable or not? In other words, even after the bittul transpired on this object, the non-Jew threw something at it, broke a piece off of it, denigrated it through an action. Now you acquire the object. So now is it really purified? You could use it, or is it still disgusting because it once had a history of being used for avodah zarah? And the Tosfot left the question open. They said that's what they think is going on in this Gemara. That's what the back and forth is about. Once it was mevutal, is there dichui etzel mitzvot or not? Dichui means if something was deferred because of some kind of extraneous circumstance, does that prevent the mitzvah from being performed again? The case is a person is meant to cover the blood of kisui hadam after doing shchita on a chaya or an oaf. And on either of those, as opposed to a behema, you have to cover the blood. If one covered the blood and then it became uncovered, so we took care of the mitzvah, it's done. But if the wind covered it, so then that's not good. If the wind covered it, you didn't cover it. So it's not that it be done, but you have to do it. There's a question of whether the undoing of a mitzvah means, yeah, but it was done, we don't have to do it again, or whether we have to try to do it again. Where this was relevant, it was a Kisui Adam, was the other Gemara that we saw on page 89a to 89b in Masechet Chulin. We're still in the what would you say, the review phase over here. We saw this Gemara toward the bottom of the page was a discussion about what to do with it started over here, these words over here, about the question of Kisui Hadam with the afar of an Ir Hanidachat. Could you do that or not? And we said, well, wait a minute, it's Isser Hana, you're not allowed to get any enjoyment. But then we said, no, number one, it's actually hard-packed earth, and that was excluded from the list of types of objects that are related to the Ir Hanidachat that have to be collected and burned in a pyre in the city square, basically, versus things that also are mechus or tlisha. They're still attached to the ground. So objects that are melded into the ground, like hard-packed earth, you could use it. But then Rava had added in, and that's what I quoted earlier, and here it is. It's from right here. Rava says, mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. So then we had this discussion that came following it. What about a shofar of avodat kochavim? It's a shofar of avodah zarah. Don't use it. Well, wait, doesn't that mean if it's telling you don't use it, because if you did use it, that it's not going to be, you're not going to be yotze? No, if you blew that shofar, you'd be yotze. What about a lulav? You won't be yotze with that, right? You lulav avodat kochavim? You shouldn't do it, but if you did it, you're yotze. Really? And the Gemara ends up saying, well, wait a minute. The problem with the lulav and the problem with the shofar is that their shear was basically brought down to zero, right? Again, kitute mechtat shir. That was the end of the Gemara here. Avodat kochavim kitute mechtat shir. Koma the mechtat male lekisui. But when it comes to kisui hadam, no matter how much you nullify the object, even if it doesn't have a shear and it's a zero, but it's still covering. So that's all you need is you need covering. I'm sorry if I'm flying through this, but this is all just a gateway to get to the next piece. All of this was just sort of the setup to the other thing that we did, which is the review of various aspects of halacha. We went straight for the bottom line, so you wouldn't be left mystified. What do we do practically? Here the Shulchan Aruch had written our Gemara, the Gemara in Chulin, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, all in one spot. V'chein shel ir nidachut shel Asherah shel Yisrael pasul. If it belongs to a Jew, that's not going to work. But if it belongs to a non-Jew, an idolater specifically, so ab initio, you may not take it, but if you did, you yotze. At least not on the first day, because there you need lachem, and this didn't belong to you. But if you did it another day, it would be okay. Yeah. And the Rambam just adds, that's specifically when you picked up the non-Jews lulav, their date palm branch, and you said, I'm not owning this. Well, you can't say that on day one because you have to own it. So it has to be on another day. The Ramah says, if you said, oh, I'm going to own it, now you own an object of avodah zarah, you can never be mevatel that. So that would not be good. And we had discussed this. And then here it mentioned, go see what's going on in Tuf Kuf Pei Vav. So we had learned also these different parts of the Mishnah Brura down here. And the Mishnah Brura, I won't belabor the point to learn the whole thing inside again, but we had learned this, and again, if you just the bottom line here of what I'm highlighting, again, the whole idea is mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu is coming up. Again, right? And taking it is not for your personal enjoyment. It's to do a mitzvah, and that's mainly what we're looking for when we do a mitzvah, is that it's not about us, it's about Hashem. So we're still sort of left with this strange question of, okay, but isn't it strange to be picking up an object of Avodah Zarah? So he mentions here to go see Taf Kuf Pei Vav. Wrote Salomar on the bottom of the highlighted lines here. The Sham Hevi Ramad Yesh Machmir Nafilu B'Shel Akum Shalat Tzed Afilu B'Diavad Kodem Shmi Batel Inan Dina Ayin La'el B'Siman Taf Kuf Pei Vav Siv Katan Yod Chet B'Mishnah Brura. So the Mishnah Brura here sends you to the Mishnah Brura on Taf Kuf Pei Vav regarding the shofar. What does it say regarding the shofar? Sorry, I skipped one thing in the Shulchan Aruch. We should see it. Ginot Hatzi'irim Shel Ovdei Kochavim. The next page is going to be Shel Ovdei Kochavim. If it is a garden, a specific garden that was planted with their special trees that they use in the service of Avodah Zarah, Mibate Shimsheyen, something that they're going to use in order to serve it. Mutter Litol Mishem Lulav. Osha Arminim, you can take Misham, take from there for lulav for other kinds of species, lemitzvah. And you could do it for the sake of a mitzvah, you're taking this, even if the tree was planted before Avodah Zarah, as long as it had not been worshipped itself. Yeah. Okay, that's enough with the lulav. Then we go to Taf Kuf Pei Vav. Here's regarding a shofar. I hope everyone's still with me. I didn't lose you all. Okay, so the shofar, yeah? The shofar case. Hagozel shofar, that's not for now. Okay. We learned that one already. Taka b'shofar shel avodat kochavim shel Yisrael lo yatsa. She'ena b'teila olamid, it can never be canceled. V'kitute mechtat shiure. It is nullified. The size of it has gone down to 0, and you need at least a shofar that you can hold, so there's a protrusion on either side. If it was an object of idolatry that belonged to an idolater, the appurtenances that go with idolatry belonging to an idolater, don't blow that. But if you did use it, you would be yotze. You still can't say, I'm going to acquire the shofar to be mine. If you did, now you own an object of Avodah Zarah and you're stuck. It would belong to a Jew. And the Rama adds here, V'yesh machmirin. There are those who are more stringent. Da'afilu b'shel oved kochavim eino yotze. Thinks you're not going to be yotze. Ella b'nidbatel be'erev yontif. It had to be canceled before yontif. Now you see here this Yud Chet. Look with me at the Mishnah Brura. Right here. Let's see this inside, and then we'll move to the Ritva. We'll see the Ritva and the Rambam tonight. Be'erev yontif. Te'im lonit batel b'shah shekidesh hayom. If at the time that you were Makadosh the Yom, you said Kiddush, you sanctified the day, lighting the candles, accepting the Kedusha of the day, you would not be allowed or able to blow that shofar. It has to have bittul before the Yontif starts. Lefi shita zu, shepasul litko bo kodem bittul. You're not allowed to use it before bittul. V'nidche az. Even if the non-Jew nullified its status on Yom Tov, the hutter, and it was permitted, at least from a technical perspective, maybe once it was pushed off from being able to be used as a mitzvah, this is the Gemara in Chulin, Avodah Zarah, Daf Mem Zayin. Once it was pushed off, maybe it's already pushed off forever. Now writes the Mishnah Brura, the truth is we follow the first opinion. Shu svarat rov haposkim. Most poskim hold that way. Even if there was no bittul on this object, the truth is you could use it for tkiyat shofar. If you have no choice. Rak im yimtza achar kach shofar kasher. If you find a kosher one later, tzarich litkobel mechadash latzei yidei svarazu ubli bracha. So to sum up, the point here is that even within the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Brura, etc., you can see before your very eyes that there is actually a discrepancy about, okay, well, technically you could do it. It's really not a good idea. It's really b'diavad shabib'diavad, etc. But there were cases and circumstances in Jewish history where they were stuck. They actually had no shofar, and the only shofar they could acquire was that which belonged to a non-Jewish person. What I want to see tonight, now we went to the end of the story, but I want to double back and have more of a conceptual understanding based on the Ritva's view. of what he saw in our Gemara on Lamed Aleph Amid Bet. So join me in the world of the Ritva. This is the Ritva to our Gemara, Ritva and Sukka. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking. Questions, comments before we go ahead?
I have a quick question. So when
Please, George, go ahead.
When they mention, I should know this from Dafyomi, but
it's okay.
A lot of comes in and goes out, unfortunately. So when they mentioned that it was owned by a non-Jew, does that mean that for sure it was worshipped or just owned by a non-Jew? Or back then,
the case here is that it was Dafka, right? The case that it was owned by a non-Jew, and while it was owned by them, they worshipped it.
Okay, so it has that distinction.
Yeah, that's the point. It's not that it belonged to a non-Jew, because you buy things from non-Jewish people all the time. There's no problem with that. The taint of it is that it was used for this nefarious purpose. That's the issue.
And how about if it was just the animal was worshipped and then slaughtered to their gods, but not the shofar, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? In other words, they worshiped the shofar in one case. What about if it was just the animal? Or that's
it's part of the animal, though. They are worshiping the whole animal.
That's true.
If they keep the shofar is still an object of Avodah Zarah, doesn't lose its taint just because they shechted the animal. Now remember though that also according to Rashi on our page on 31b, what did Rashi say? Lulav shel Avodah Zarah, that it was used for the purpose of either beautifying, adorning, and the chabed, like to clean and thereby make it, show the dignity of this object, of this using this lulav, or inami she'avodata belulav lahaviro lefanea olezarka bo, that the instrument that they use in order to worship the idol is this lulav. In neither case, for Rashi on 31b, was it actually a lulav shel avodah zarah that people were bound down to lulavim. But we saw that other Gemaras, and in fact, based on our understanding, certainly the way Tosfot saw it on Avodah Zarah 47a, it is being worshipped. That is the case. Our Gemara here, when Rava said Lulav Avodah Zarah lo yitol, for whatever reason, Rashi shied away from actually saying, oh, and if you bow down to the object itself. He made it sound like it was something related to the service of the idol, but it's not the actual idol. So we don't 100% know when we look at it. Okay, so does that mean, according to Rashi, if it was the idol, that would be too much of a taint to be used? He doesn't tell us. Now, based on this statement of Rava, if you see the Ritva here on the page, the Ritva, which we're up to right here, can you see this little cursor when I move it around? Is that visible to you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if you see it. Okay, so that would obviate the need to keep highlighting, in fact. Va'ama Rava, lulav shel avodah zarah lo yitol v'im natal kasha. This was our Gemara 31b. That line was actually a line that was taken out of the Gemara in Chulin, right? Page 89a, where it actually used the expression right here, this Rava statement. And the Rava's statement was explained as mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. That's how Rashi on our page knew to quote that element of it. The Ritva views it as follows. Perush. Here's the explanation of the Ritva. Da'afilu kodem bittul, even before it was nullified. De'ilu la'achar bittul, afilu chatchila nami. Kevin de shari lahedjot l'mais l'mitzvah. He says, well, if I look up the Gemara 339 footnote, it's going to tell you that other Rishonim disagree. But it basically, when we had it in the, based on what I understand in the Gemara, over here, when Rava made this statement, it must be that this object is still an object of Avodah Zarah. If it's after Bittul, then the object has no taint left anymore, according to the Ritva. It's not ma'is at all. You could even use it for a mitzvah. I mean, it had a status and now it's been purified. It doesn't exist anymore as problematic. Even though Reish Lakish asked the question and was querying what to do about the bowing down, they bow down to a date palm tree, and then you want to use the branch for, is that possible? Even though there was that question, Rava Pshitale Kidabarir Nahatam Vihilchta Kavate. Rava was very clear there, as was explained there in the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah in 47a. V'hilchata kavatei, and the halacha followed Rava. Remember, mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. The mitzvot are just not given for the purpose of our personal enjoyment, and therefore you can just use it for the purpose of doing a mitzvah. Yeah. Actually, that was not the Gemara in 47.8. That was the Gemara in Chulin. I'm sorry, I confused the two. Okay, sorry about that. But even though it was a question of Masechet Avodah Zarah, Rava was very clear. He thinks that it's clear that it's really mutter to use for the service of Hashem. And here in our case, v'hacha kodem bitulhu. It must be before the nullification happened. V'tama diyatza mishum demitzot lav lehanat nitnu k'de'ita b'kama duchte. It says in several places l'Rava, and that's Rava's position. Therefore, even before bittul, it would be fine to use here. V'afa gav demit hanei b'asiyat mitzvot shemekabel schar ba'olam hazeh u'v'olam haba. But wait a minute, you do get enjoyment from mitzvahs. You know what the mitzvah enjoyment is? You get reward. There's reward in this world, and there's reward in the next world. So you can't say mitzvah, there's no enjoyment. There is enjoyment. The Ritva says, no. Lo chashiv iser be'isur hana, el kshenena begufo shel iser. When we say there's a prohibition of having enjoyment from something, we mean that the object itself, not the byproduct of using it, but the object itself gives you some kind of benefit. Aval, kol she'ein ha'ana migufo, ela shegorim lo hana v'revach mimakom acher. Maybe a little bit of a statement right out of the, we're just finished with Megillah Esther. Makom acher, from another place, meaning from Hashem, right? It doesn't have to be that, sort of rhetorical flourish, but any time that there is no enjoyment from the object itself, but rather it causes enjoyment and benefit and some kind of expansiveness, if you will, or profit from some other place, eino hana mina iser. You're not actually benefiting from the iser. Uchederach she'am, it's the same thing as Chazal said, benoder hana mima'ayan shetovel bo b'yamot hagshamim. Let's say you said, I won't have any enjoyment. You take an oath, a vow, rather. You're not going to get enjoyment from such and such a body of water, a spring, and you want to be tovel in it. Could you be tovel in it in the winter, in the rainy season? You could. Why? She'eino nana beguf hamayim. You're not getting enjoyment. It's the rainy season. It's cold and damp. Even though even though the act of immersion gives you a byproduct of purification. I said I'm not going to get a red enjoyment from it. What's the enjoyment? I enjoy being pure. That's a byproduct. The enjoyment has to be from the object itself. If the fact that you did an action prepares you or authorizes you, in this case, you're tahor, so you can go into the Beit HaMikdash. If you're a Kohen, you can eat truma, whatever it is. So that's not the same thing as direct enjoyment. V'chein hada amar Rava hatam b'sandal shel avodah zarah lo tachlotz v'imchaltza chalitzato ksher. Another example of Rava is if the sandal used in a chalitza ceremony was of avodah zarah, you should not use it. But if you did, it works. Why? The mitzvah lav lehanot nitnu. Our example comes up again, right? And v'afal gav demerav chatuva b'hoi chalitza lo chashiva hana be'iser. And he says, I explained this elsewhere. You can find the footnote, send you off to the other sugya. But the point is, when it's a byproduct of the action, that's not something that you actually have to worry about it being an actual feature of hana. Hana means that it's the object itself gives you pleasure. That's what mudar hana is, and that's mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. If you look just back at footnote here where he says lo mais la mitzvah, bit of a spoiler alert. It's with a Tosfot that we may or may not ever get to because Pesach is bearing down and next week's already Nisan. But it mentions that according to Rabbeinu Tam and the Tosfot Ba'ashera, that's the long one from the bottom of our page, he disagrees with the Ritva. He holds that lechatchila you should not take it because it is actually mais le'inyan mitzvah because it once had the name of avodah zarah upon it. So wrote the Baal Hamor in the Dapei Harif. You can find it there. So what we have from the Ritva is the idea. He has a very, a very high-minded view of what bittul would mean. Bittul, if someone did bittul on an object of avodah zarah, the object itself, so to speak, did tshuva. It was perfectly cleansed. That's what he says right here. And he thinks that what Rav is referring to here is actually even before bittul. Further, he says that the reason why it works before bittul, it's actually literally an object that 5 minutes ago someone bowed down to, and you're picking it up and you're going to twirl it around, to get a mitzvah from it. But you're not doing that for your health. You're doing that because it's a mitzvah. The byproduct is schar, but it's not the motivating factor. And the fact that it's not the motivating factor initially, but the byproduct of your action is in and of itself enough to remove its taint. And as he writes, and the footnote points out, Rabbeinu Tam disagreed with that. Rabbeinu Tam thought that really this would really not compute because it is actually with a status of being ma'is. And what's ma'is? It's something abominable or disgusting, which, like that halachic category, it's almost like someone saying it's like, sepasnisht. It's like, is that a halachic category? No, but it's a Jewish religious category. It's just not the right way. Therefore, and how do I know that it's only that? Because b'diavad, if you used it, it's not usher. You would be yotze the mitzvah. We saw that in the Shulchan Aruch. That seems to be what Rava is himself saying. Enter the Rambam from stage right over here. The Rambam already on the Mishnah had an interesting idea. The Rambam says on our Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Perek Gimel, the one that starts with Lulav Hagazav Yavesh Pasel. Remember the first sugya in our Perek? Mitzvah baba vera ain't a mitzvah. Therefore, the Lulav Hagazal, and look what he writes. B'shel Hashem shlir nidachat pasel. He thinks the problem is mitzvah baba vera. Now look down at our Gemara in 31b. Did the Gemara use the expression mitzvah baba vera? Not once. Someone asked about it. Maybe it was Mark. I think someone asked about it when we started learning the sugya, like, where's mitzvah b'avera? The Rambam says, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. It's mitzvah b'avera. Vizu, I'm back in the Parashim Mishnayos of the Rambam. Vizu ha'ashera, hishi ha'ilan atzmo ne'evad. But in order to be mitzvah b'avera, you have to worship the actual tree itself. In Rashi, it wasn't actually the object of avodah zarah. It was being used as an appurtenance. And the problem with the Asherah, as the Gemara itself clarified, it was an Asherah de Moshe. All right? V'yidbaru lecha chiluke ha'asher ba'avodah zarah. U'krayadata amaroyit aleh v'yidbak b'yadcha ma'uma min achera. So it needs to be explained to you the distinction between the Asherot, right, of avodah zarah versus avodah zarah itself. Yeah? And here the Rambam has invoked this mitzvah avera category in the Yada Chazaka. What does the Rambam say? Arbat meaning ha'elu shein lulav v'hadas v'arav v'etrik shaya echad mehen yavish ogazel oganuv afil achayesh shaya. Here it is. O shahaya me'ashera neveret afal pisha bitlu hasher mila'avda, even though it was nullified, or if it was of an irani dachat, it's puzzle. Right? So that falls in line with the halach as we understand it. And then he goes on to say, but I thought he said over here, it's part of the mitzvah ba'avera world. See this word? Up here? He said, therefore. The easy cop-out answer is, well, he wrote this when he was younger. He wrote this when he was older. He changed his mind. It could be. But you see the distinction? This is the title on this Mishnah for the Rambam is, it's the Mitzvah Ba'avera Mishnah. Therefore, Gazel and Asher and Idachat, they're puzzle. That's why you can't use it. Just straight out of the Mishnah. Yet, in the halacha itself, in the Mishnah Torah, he's not invoking that category now. He's actually saying that if it was Avodah Zarah itself, you can use it. You can grab onto it. So there is a question here about how to understand the Rambam and what it actually means. He goes on to discuss, what to do if it's wilted, if it hasn't fully dried out, if it's shadat chak, shadat zakana. Okay, so let's learn together the Magid Mishnah. The Magid Mishnah writes the following: Arbat meaning elu shebelulav shehein lulav v'chulei she'echad men yavish aganav v'gazul So he quotes, he tells you this is right from the beginning of Parak, of the Parak, Levagazel Yavesh, quotes the Mishnah. Fine. And the Gemara explains that even after Yeush, Hagazel Pasul, that was the whole point of the Gemara, was that mitzvah ba'averes, that even after you nullified it, it's not going to be good. The Amru Gemara, and the Gemara there said, V'shel Ashera Pasul. V'amar Rav Lulav Shel Akum Lo Yitos. Quote straight out of our Gemara. Yeah? V'imnatal kasher. But if you did take a lulav avodah zarah, it would be kosher. What was the answer of the Gemara? The Gemara said, "V'tirtze b'ashera demosha askinan tichitute mechtat shiurei." So here also, avhachanami mechtat shiurei. Daikanami diktani dumi di'er nidachat or nidachat mechtat shiurei avhachinami mechtat shiurei. That's what the Gemara says. But look what is pointed out by the Magid Mishnah. It's not actually written this way in the halacha. So look back here. These 4 species mentioned. It mentioned after Yeush, or if it's from the Asherah, which is worshipped. Didn't mention the Asherah de Moshe, just said it was an Asherah that was worshipped. Even though that it was canceled, nullified, this Asherah, or if it was Yernei Dachat, it's possible. Why? Ki tute mechtat shiure, because it doesn't have any shear left. But if it was actually still being used for avodah zarah, you shouldn't use it lechatchila. But if you took it, it'd still be okay. Dat Rambam Mefarshim, says the Magid Mishnah, Shira'iti. Most people think lefarish ba'asherah de Moshe, shaita ba'aretz b'yemei Moshe, shelo haya la bittul. Most of the Mefarshim explain that the idea of the mention of the Asherah de Moshe in the Gemara is to tell you that it can never be nullified. But look what the Rambam wrote. See? Even if it was nullified, even if you nullify the Asherah and it's no longer being worshipped, still no good. Most of the Mefarshim think that the reason is that Asherah de Moshe cannot be nullified. Lefi shahaita shal Yisrael shezachu ba'aretz. They belong to the Jewish people. Just like the Jewish people, if a Jewish person, God forbid, worships idols, the Jewish people's worship of that idol means that it can never be fixed. The taint is indelible. Why is the Asherah de Moshe, according to most Mefarshim, indelible? Because it is the property of the Jewish people. When the Jewish people arrive in Eretz Yisrael, we become the owners of Eretz Yisrael at the time of the Kibush V'Nachla. Therefore, we were all zoche in the Asherah trees. Now they're the Avodah Zarah belonging to Jews, the corporate Bnei Yisrael. Therefore, it has to be destroyed. She'af hi ein yotzin ba. You can't be yotze in that. But aval Asherah acheret shel akum, af hi dina ke'akum acheret. But if it was another kind of Asherah, meaning an Asherah tree in another country, even if it was worshipped by idolaters, they could always be mevatel it. You could just nullify its status. Then it could be picked up by a Jew and used. But if a Jew went to Idol Depot in Chutz La'aretz and they purchased such an Asherah tree, that had just been worshipped by non-Jews. It was never mevutal. So then it would be yours. You can't you can't cancel it. Vim natal lo yatsa, right? You wouldn't be yotze. Amru yatsa who biyom sheni shadim yotze b'shal elu divrayim zal. So the Magid Mishnah just says, let me tell you what most people hold. Most people hold this way. Again, to clarify, Asherah of Moshe is what the Jewish people had already acquired when they arrived in the land of Israel, which includes all the forests, all the trees. So it's not, the non-Jews can't be mevatel it now because it's stuck. But if you went to another country and you picked up an Asherah, bona fide, certified as having been worshipped tree, if you buy it, then they're stuck. But if you didn't buy it and the non-Jew broke a piece off, threw something out and said, I despise you, Avodah Zarah, you could acquire it and you could use it. Yeah. But the Rambam didn't write it this way. V'Rabbeinu katav b'dina asherah afilu bitlua. You see, does everyone see the contradiction? I hope I'm not talking in tongues over here to most of you. But the Rambam writes on one line, the Asherah tree, even if it was mevutal by the non-Jew for being worshipped, you still can't use it. He doesn't mention Asherah of Moshe. Doesn't say it's in Eretz Yisrael. Anywhere. The Asherah tree is a special category. But then the very next line, he says, if it's from Avodah Zarah, you shouldn't take it. But if you did, you don't say anyway. I mean, which is it? Why is the Asherah in its own category? Rabbeinu katav b'dina Asherah afilu bitlua, v'katav b'stam ba'akum yatsa lo chilek ben akum liYisrael. And we talked about the idolatry itself, object of idolatry. He didn't even mention whether it was one belonging to a Jew or a non-Jew. Remember, we saw in the Shulchan Aruch, he's concerned. Well, if you took one of these species that's of Avodah Zarah, well, belonging to a Jew or a non-Jew, belong to a Jew, can never remove the taint. The Rambam just has a blanket statement. You took an object of Avodah Zarah, as long as it wasn't an Asherah, and you want to use it, yeah, you're Yotzei. Strange. V'hu atzmo katav perakhet milchot akum she'af shein shavin le'in bittul imim shel akum yesh lem bittul v'imim shel yisrael ein lem bittul v'kan lo chilek. In the halachot of Avodah Kochavim u'Mazalot at Sefer Mada, the Rambam wrote that actually you're going to have the capability to nullify idolatry if you're a non-Jew, but if you're a Jew and you own it, it can never be removed. Says the Magid Mishnah, to answer this conundrum, and this is why we went through this whole process, is to get to this line of the Magid Mishnah. So you could drum roll it. I made myself much too big here, which is not intentional. Veneer releases the Magid Mishnah that according to the Rambam, Shehu Gores Khan Mishum Mitzvah Haba Ba'avera Kiktsat Nuschaot. The Rambam maintains that what's going on here is Mitzvah Haba Ba'avera, as is in some of the versions of the manuscripts of the Gemara. Not ours, apparently. V'tam ha'asherah. The reason why I mentioned the asherah, he she'ikr netiyata liyot ha'ilan ne'evad. The word asherah, the species asherah, definitionally is that it is being planted for the purpose of idolatry. I was trying to find an analog, and I don't want to stray into the wrong territory, but let's say there was another religion that made certain objects that were always used for the purpose of adoration, if not bowing down to it, at least adoration. And you went to the store and I don't know, you decided you just want to buy that object because you think it would be nice at the end of your name because your name would be enhanced by it, so you buy this object. It's very hard to argue, well, it is a dual use, and no, they're all made for that purpose. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but I don't want to get more specific than that. The Asherah trees, the purpose of them being planted is to be worshipped. V'zeu perish be'Asherah de Moshe. And that's what the words about Asherah de Moshe in our Gemara 31b mean, according to the Rambam, according to Magid Mishnah. Shehizkir Moshe. Look at Rashi on 31b. Open your Gemara 31b. What did Rashi say? Asherah de Moshe means Otam shehayu b'shat kibush Eretz Yisrael. It's all of the trees that were in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the kibush. It's Shrichana Katav Sreifa, where the Torah said you must destroy them. Therefore, since the Torah commanded you to destroy them, Kirichtiv, Vashirim Tisrafun Ba'esh, and the lulav tzarech shir, the lulav requires a certain measurement, and the measurement has been destroyed. The high command, the michtat shiure, came to l'sreifa kai. Since it stands and is slated for burning, it's as if it's already burned. Now, it was Rashi. Most of the Mefarshim we have here on our page, right in front of us, the shared screen, as quoted by the Magid Mishnah, say that what's Asherah de Moshe? It's the Asherah trees that were in the land when the Jewish people arrived. But the point is, there's no capacity for bittul, because it became the property of the Jewish people when they got into the land. For Rashi, I think what he means is, you are making a decision when you come into the land that you're going to fulfill the mitzvahs. And one of the mitzvahs is all the trees that are called Asherah in the land right now should be destroyed. According to Rav HaMefarshim, quoted by the Magid Mishnah, it's not because the mitzvah's there, but because your arrival in the land made these objects yours. And once they're yours, You can never rid them of their taint of being idolatrous in nature. But according to the Rambam, says the Maggid Mishnah, the issue here is that an Asherah de Moshe means the ones mentioned by Moshe, meaning the type of tree mentioned by Moshe. Now, later, anywhere in the world, it's not a function of Eretz Yisrael, it's a function of the type of tree that it is. V'kach katav Rabbeinu Sham, and Rambam wrote that in Hilchot Avodat Kochav Mazalot, Ilan shenatu mitchila shehei nevad, anyone who planted a tree initially that should be worshipped, Asher Bahana, V'zuhi Asherah, Mura B'Torah, Ad Kan L'Shon. That's what the Asherah is that's mentioned in the Torah. The Kevan, and since Shenatiyat Ha'ilan Mitchila Haita Liyot Ne'avad, since it was planted for the purpose of being worshipped, B'dinu Sheyi Pasel, therefore it is always going to be pasel. Masha Enkin B'Avodat Kochavim Mazalot, which is not the case with regular Avodah Zarah. This is the opinion of our Rabbi B'Tzarach, and you should investigate it further. So in other words, even if you're mevatali Asherah from serving it, you can never ruin its taint because it is definitionally, Asherah de Moshe means Moshe labeled Asherah trees in a certain way. Not because they're in Eretz Yisrael, not because the mitzvah to burn them when you get there, but because they're always that way. But if another object is avodah zarah, you really shouldn't take it. But if you did, you would be yotzei, in fact. So this is the Maggid Mishnah. Let me pause here. Questions, comments?
It looks to me like that the object itself is not as important as the function that it produces in Avodah Zarah.
Okay.
To what you just read.
Yep. I accept. But the idea is that this according to the Maggid Mishnah's understanding of the Rambam maintains, as most of the Mefarshim do, that an object of Avodah Zarah could be used for the purpose of a mitzvah. It's not nice. You really shouldn't. But if you did, if you were stuck, you would still be yotzei. According to the Maggid Mishnah's reading of the Rambam, though, the idea of the Asherah tree is not connected to Eretz Yisrael. It's connected to a species called Asherah. Don't eat pig. Doesn't matter where the pig is roaming, and don't have an Asherah tree, and therefore it has no shear, because you gotta assume that it is an object that is planted for the purpose of being worshipped. And this was the Gemara we saw in Mem Zayin Amud Aleph in Masechet Avodah Zarah, where we had the description of the tree that was planted for the purpose of Avodah Zarah. Yeah. And that means it has a taint that can never be removed.
Well, there's the command, the mitzvah to burn the Asherah trees. Asherah intershafun ma'esh, when you get to the land of Israel. So regardless, even though by coming to the land you kind of got possession of it, nevertheless you're commanded to destroy it, unlike what we said with an Avodah Zarah object that a Jew owned.
Right. But the expression here of the Maggid Mishnah is, yes, there's a mitzvah to destroy it when you get to the land. But the point is that the word Asherah trees, you cannot say that they were planted for an innocuous purpose ever. Therefore, even if someone claims they were mevatel, the Avodah Zarah component of an Asherah tree still wouldn't work. The Maggid Mishnah was forced to say this, put it back on the screen, because of the strangeness that the Rambam in one line says, oh, if you took one of the four species was of Avodah Zarah, and you shouldn't do it, but if you did, but the Yavid you'd be Yotzei. So it says, yeah, but not for an Asherah. Avi shabitla Asherah mila avda, right? Here.
So Rabbi?
Afil achayesh, oshayim Asherah nevedet. If it was from the Asherah, I should have highlighted this too, I guess, right? If it was a worshipped Asherah tree, even if you mevatel it, from you can still not use it for Avodah Zarah. For the opposite, the mitzvah of lulav. It's too late. It's stuck. Well, what do you mean? The next line you said you shouldn't do it, but it would be okay. And the Maggid Mishnah says Asherah is a special kind of Avodah Zarah. Ira, you're asking a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just have a quick question. So if we were to take an example, and I know we've done the concept of mitzvah baba vera, and for many shiurim we've discussed it.
Yeah.
The question is, if somebody took a lulav and used it for, someone had it, it was used for Palm Sunday, that's avodah zarah, right? So therefore, if they use that lulav on Palm,
Mishamshe avodah zarah.
what?
Mishamshe avodah zarah, depending, yeah.
So if it were used, then that would be a mitzvah baba avera then, right?
I mean, yes, except if the non-Jewish person, that's according to the Rambam, right there. According to the Rambam. Right? You have this here, right? According to the Maggid Mishne, he says, well, I think the Rambam holds that the words mishum mitzvah ba'avera should actually be mentioned about why you can't use objects of avodah zarah in the service of a mitzvah, even klapei shmaya, using it now that it was used for avodah zarah. But he backs away from because he's trying to explain what's going to happen with the Asherah over here. Let's say you had the palm from Palm Sunday. You really couldn't use it. Wait a minute. But if it was from avodah zarah, you shouldn't take it. L'chatchila. But if you were stuck and you did, but the Yaved, you'd be Yotzei. That is what we say in the end.
Yeah.
Still, we saw also, I put it back on the screen, the Shulchan Aruch had said that it's not, this is still the Ritva. Where am I here? Here. Yeah. The Shulchan Aruch had said up here about the shofar, that people, there are those who are machmer avodah kochavim, you're not yotzei unless it was from Erev Yontif, right? Because on Yontif itself, you couldn't be mevatel it. But here in Tafresh Mem Tet, sorry to make everyone so crazy dizzy, but here it is. So you have it here. You're in a dachat and a shera. If it's of a Jew, it's possible. But if it's a vodat kochavim, the chachila don't take it. But if you did take it, you'd be yotzei, just not on the first day because you actually have to own it. But if you picked up theirs that doesn't belong to them and you did a mitzvah with it on a day when it doesn't have to be yours, it would work. B'di aved. Why? Because mitzvah lav lehanot nitnu. And here, by the by, even if according to the Mishnah Berurah, even if the non-Jew nullified it, there's the shari lahedjot, but legavoa aser demais. It's really prohibited to be used for Hashem because it really is an abomination that you should use an object of avodah zarah. But if you did take it and you used it, you made a bracha on it, so you'd be yotzei. Bein tzarich lachzer v'lito. Even if the non-Jew never was mevatel the palm from Palm Sunday, right? You can't get enjoyment, you can't eat it or whatever. You come back and cave in the moila bittul lahati rabba. If bittul could work on it, which it could by the non-Jew, then if you pick it up while it still belongs to them, so it's not really about to be burned, and therefore the non-Jew can be mevatlet. And that actually is the halacha in the end.
So if I were, obviously Palm Sunday, I'm not trying to talk about Palm Sunday anymore, but it's
okay.
The question is, I still have my lulav that I normally burn with my chametz. So could I take that lulav and give it to a non-Jew on Palm Sunday since I used it for a mitzvah? Am I allowed to do that?
No, that's something else. That's aiding and abetting a person who may be involved in something that, according to many opinions, is avodah zarah, and helping them do their thing.
Okay.
That you cannot do. You cannot do that. By the way, that's the beginning of a Masechet Avodah Zarah. That's the whole problem, even though paying back a loan, under certain circumstances in such a way that you think this person's going to go thank their getchka, right? And then we have this big problem because we're saying, well, in the time that's around their holiday, you can't do business with them. Yeah, but when you have a holiday and the holiday is, I don't know, every Sunday, so you can't do business with them 3 days before, 3 days after, you just got rid of all the days of the week, right? When it's a weekly holiday. So Tosfot right there on Avodah Zarah, Daf Bet Amud Aleph, have to try to explain, like, how do we involve
now I remember learning it. Yeah, I remember learning it. Yeah.
But that's not for now. Anyway, another meeting coming up at 9. And I feel like it's like a natural breaking point to stop. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead or behind or whatever. In addition to wishing mazel tov to Sully, I want to wish a big mazel tov to Jeff Bernstein, whose son Yoshi is going to be bar mitzvah this Shabbos. And it was mazel and gesund. Great thing. Should be a great schut for all of us.
Very nice.
We're heading into the month of Nisan. I'd love to have one more shiur. I hope I don't regret that I just said I'd like to have one more share. But if possible, let's say we'll try to do one more. The thing I don't know yet is whether that one more is going to be on the 15th or on the 22nd. It's one of the two. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. I may have something next Monday night that will forestall having a shir, in which case it would have to be on the 22nd. I will know that probably by Sunday of next week, one way or the other, and I'll let you know. Apologies. Anyway, I wish everyone a Chag Hashuv Sameach, great things.
Yep.
So meet again soon.
Okay, Mazel